I was a female comics creator that was blacklisted for questioning feminism. Sam Meggs and the Mary Sue got me blacklisted from the comics industry and banned from comic conventions in Western Canada, which now, according to their operations manager, is extended to all of the comics conventions that Informa runs, which is basically all of them. These are all my unsold boxes of Xenospora. All told, over $10,000 worth of investment into printing my comic book. And basically they will remain unsold since I have no physical place to actually sell my comic book. Boxes, it's really quite heavy. This is volume 1. I'm actually quite proud of the cover. Volume 2 was quite a bit faster. It only took me about 4 months, and that was because I had figured out more of my process and how I was going to approach creating the pages, and I had gotten a lot more confident in my art. It was pretty inspiring to be able to talk about this story and inspire someone else to get excited about it. Mark Wade publicly defended the Expo's actions and the Mary Sue's actions, and he called me a lying bully. And now the Mary Sue and gets to take another swipe at me. If the judge awards the Mary Sue full costs, I'm on the hook for $174K. Selling my house and the Badger Cave won't cover that. It won't even come close. As you've probably heard, we have lost our lawsuit against the Calgary Expo and the Mary Sue for injurious falsehood and breach of contract on all counts. I have just received the requests for defense costs from the defendants, the Mary Sue and the Calgary Expo. They're asking for $174,000 in defense costs. When I started this, I knew that I could be facing some significant financial penalties for pursuing this lawsuit. And lo and behold, now, Harry assures me that the likelihood of them receiving the entirety of their defense costs is fairly remote. They could technically receive the entirety of their defense costs, but precedent in civil court is to award 10 to 15% of the total requested award. So 10 to 15% of the $50,000 that could have been awarded in the Calgary Small Claims Court. That's technically. Of course, that all relies on this judge still operating within the framework of the law and precedent. So we'll see. For those of you who don't know, the story, in 2014, I applied for and received a booth at the 2015 Calgary Comics Entertainment Expo. I attended the expo, and this was after having attended the 2014 Saskatoon Expo with no incident. I attended the Calgary Expo, I put up my booth, and I intended to sell my comic Xenospora and promote HoneyBadgerRadio, my podcast. In the course of the event, I went to a feminist panel, and I didn't even know it was feminist at the time, called Women into Comics. The panelists described wanting to have a conversation with the other side, with presumably men's rights activists. And then they asked the question, why do men's rights activists not want feminists or women in geek and gamer spaces? And I stood up and I said, the reason why we push back against you is because you present women as victims and you don't look at how men can also be victims. And that's bad because you, not just to bring men into the conversation, but also to challenge the notion that women are defined by being victims. What ensued was what I thought a great discussion. Other audience members chimed in with their points of view of various topics, and the discussion panel, they went back and forth, the panelists went back and forth with the audience members. I thought it was very productive. And I went back to my booth in the evening. The next morning, I was kicked out of the convention. Everything that actually happened, I've sort of had to figure out through a process of excavating the truth. Because, to be quite honest, I was broadsided the morning I was kicked out. And I was told the reason why I was kicked out was because the convention had received 20 Twitter complaints. So 20 tweets complaining about my attendance at the convention. And complaining about the booth having the Gamergate logo on 2 banners. And incidentally, I put the Gamergate logo on those banners because Gamergate had gotten me to that convention in the first place. So it was simply a thank you to them. And getting kicked out, I was just, at the time, I was just in shock. And they gave me, the operations manager gave me 15 minutes to break down my entire booth and get out. It took us 3 years, 3 years of trial to finally find out the real reason why I was kicked out. Well, one of 3 that ultimately were said to be the real reason. 1, the number of complaints. The operations manager said that even if every single complaint had been false, which he didn't investigate, the sheer number of them would have got me kicked out. Even though in the Calgary Expo's contract, they say that they investigate any complaint, and if it's false, it's considered itself to have broken the contract. So there you go. And then the other thing that he said was that I broke, under the harassment policy of their contract, the undermining clause. So there was a little statement that you cannot undermine people, which I guess is disagree with them or not be convinced by their arguments. That's considered harassment. And finally, he said that one of the panelists, Brittany LeBlanc, had actually complained, which was really shocking to me because after the panel, 1 minute after the panel, Brittany LeBlanc tweeted out, "The Women into Comics panel was interesting, especially with men's rights activists in the audience." So we made the panel more interesting. That doesn't make sense as a statement that she was in any way intimidated or harassed by us. Of interest, that we made the panel of interest regardless. So I'm going to tell you what really happened. And I don't think I have. I don't think I have ever told the story of what really happened. I pissed off a feminist cultural commentator named Sam Meggs. And I got kicked out. I got removed from that comic expo, from every comic expo that company puts on for 10 years, and now the ban is indefinite. And now every comic expo that the company that acquired that company, which is every expo in North America and much of the world, I'm now blacklisted from, apparently, according to the operations manager. She effectively destroyed my career in comics, kicked me out of geek and gamer space. She is the one person who could legitimately claim that she has a woman's head on her wall, that she removed a woman, just unpersoned a woman in geek and gamer spaces in the comics industry, just got her blacklisted. And I know from having talked to, I can't specify them, I know that I'm actually blacklisted by other comics company in the comics industry. Not only can I not sell physical copies of my comics at conventions, I can't work. So she could put my head on her wall and legitimately say, I destroyed this woman's career and made it so that she couldn't attend conventions in North America. And what's really ironic about all this is she writes books about women in geek and gaming, making spaces inclusive to women in geek and gamer space, to women, making geek and gamer spaces inclusive to women. And she writes for BioWare and Insomniac Games. I wonder, and I'll explain how she's connected to all this, but I wonder if she ever thinks about that. I wouldn't surprise me if she never thinks about what she did at all. But I wonder if she does think about it, if it does cross her mind, if she ever thinks it was a triumph that she managed to completely unperson me and an entire industry. Because, of course, it's very convenient that her ideology justifies an action like that. I mean, I wouldn't buy into any ideology that could justify an action like that based on a woman's beliefs, not her behavior, not engaging in any kind of violence or advocacy of violence or collusion, not engaging in any kind of negative behavior, but just because she believes something that I disagree with, I would never want to be part of an ideology that would justify doing that. I would never want to be part of an ideology that would justify doing that to Sam Maggs. I would never have done that to Sam Maggs. In fact, the first time I ever mentioned or talked about Sam Maggs was in a video in which I defended her when a friend of mine, Sage Gerard, called her a cunt. And I said, that's not fair. Now, Sage Gerard has experienced some pretty significant issues with false accusations by feminists in academia, so I can understand his anger. But I told him, Sam Maggs she isn't the person that did that to you. So I don't think it's fair to call her a cunt. That's the first time I ever mentioned or talked about Sam Maggs in my life. And incidentally, when Brittany LeBlanc sent that tweet out, Sam Maggs contacted her, said, there were memories at your panel? Tell me everything. And then I know, based on the trail of email and the eventual article that came out of this, Sam Maggs took that video in which I defended her. This is what's unbelievable to me. She would have had to watch through that entire video knowing that I defended her. And she would have had to find the points at which I said, I thought the panelists I found it sad that the panelists would don their ball gowns of victimhood and sort of parade them on display to show to Brittany LeBlanc, one of the panelists, who said she didn't really understand that. Well, let me explain it. You make yourself lesser. When you say that you're a victim of something that a man wouldn't be a victim of, you make yourself a lesser being. You make yourself a lesser being. And you do it for some sort of arbitrary ideal of damseling, just like a beauty ideal. And I find that sad. And I find it particularly sad that you will make yourself a lesser being and then find that empowerment. And don't give me this patriarchy theory, because it's never been proven. In fact, it's been disproven. So you're using a disproven falsehood to explain why you make yourself lesser. It's sad. That's what it means. That's what I meant. But Sam Maggs showed this to Brittany LeBlanc, and Brittany LeBlanc took offense. She accused me of being disrespectful and disappointing because I didn't agree with her. She made herself a victim of me not agreeing with her. So because I went to a panel and didn't agree with feminists, I got kicked out of an entire marketplace, out of the comics book industry. Just kicked out. I mean, some might say, well, you didn't have much, I had the possibility. So I got kicked out for disagreeing with a feminist. It comes down to that. And then after Sam Meggs showed Brittany LeBlanc these video clips, Brittany LeBlanc sent that complaint to the Calgary Expo, which was one of the reasons why I got kicked out. And then she also sent the complaint to a writer at the Mary Sue, which Sam Meggs was an editor at. Sam Meggs arranged this entire article that accused me of infiltrating the event under false pretenses, even though I used my name and my business name, and my business name on my contract. And they were all over our badges, the program guide, our booth. And thus I was summarily kicked out. And that article got everywhere. Nobody in the media actually stopped and asked themselves, well, the Mary Sue is a corporate partner of the Calgary Expo. Maybe there's some conclusion there. Maybe we should look a little deeper into the story. No, they just critically repeated the Mary Sue's allegations against me without even, and neither the Mary Sue nor the Calgary Expo ever asked my side of the situation. They had, I would have shown them a recording I had of the panel indicating no harassment had taken place. And of course, they could have just looked at my contract and found out that, no, there's no way I could have infiltrated, because I would have had to infiltrate under my own name and my company name. That's absurd. And as for the tweet sequence, all of those complaints, they were sent by Sam Meggs' associate, someone she worked with on a YouTube channel, who was in Toronto at the time, who somehow received a photo that could only have been taken in Calgary and tweeted, "This is fucked up," at the Calgary Expo organizers. And then a whole bunch of other people repeated it and amplified those complaints. And those were the complaints that the operations manager said were one of the 3 reasons why I was kicked out. That he would have kicked me out for the number of complaints alone. He would have kicked me out for my associations with Gamergate and men's rights activists alone. He would kick me out for the complaint that Brittany LeBlanc sent alone. And he essentially said that because of my associations, he didn't actually have to pursue the contract he signed with me, or the Calgary Expo signed with me. They didn't have to pursue it because they could break it because I'm a bad person. Even though at the time he kicked me out, it's because I could have been in manifest danger to the convention. This is what he said. He even sent spies to infiltrate events that we created and publicized to make sure that we weren't, going to infiltrate their events? Anyway, so he thinks I'm a manifest danger, and yet when he evicted me, he said, there were complaints about you in Saskatoon. So he knew complaints as in, not complaints about my behavior, just, they're here, and they're awful complaints. So he must have known that I had already been at a convention and nothing had happened. Except for people complaining. I guess not enough people complained that time. Nothing would dissuade him from this notion that I'm some sort of dangerous entity, dangerous quantity. And it's just fascinating to me that Sam Meggs could set this all in motion. She was behind the tweets that got me kicked out. She was behind Brittany LeBlanc somehow going from, the panel was interesting with men's rights activists into the audience, to they were disruptive and also maybe possibly quasi-harassing. And then also her associate in Toronto suddenly takes an interest in a convention in Calgary halfway across the continent and manages to just magic up a photo that could only be taken at that convention, which Sam Meggs was attending. Her fingerprints are over all of this. And she's definitely behind this Mary Sue article that smeared my name, my business practices, my business, my products, across the entire industry, trade publications for comic books. All because I disagreed with a feminist. And I get these people coming to me and say, not all feminists are like that. You're right. They aren't. Because you're not disagreeing with them. A tyranny isn't defined by what it does with its supporters. It's defined by what it does to its detractors. Yeah, sure, if you want to see that feminism that I see, you got to disagree with some feminists on their core values. You got to say, I think reducing women down to victims of things you wouldn't reduce men down to demeans them and belittles them and makes them lesser. Say that and see what they do. And it's like she managed to put in motion a set of dominoes, this huge machine. Not just getting evicted from the convention. Not just having this article full of falsehoods published about me, smearing my name in an entire industry, but somehow ending in a judgment that's wrong in law and fact, protecting the media for having done it, protecting the corporation for having done it. And essentially saying that Canadians no longer have consumer protection laws. They no longer can enjoy contract law. If they sign a contract with a corporation and that corporation decides to break their half of it, oh well, too bad, so sad. You thought you had rights as a Canadian citizen? Oh no, ho, ho. And all of this put in motion by one woman's vendetta against me. And it still just astounds me that she would look at that video in which I was defending her and use that to destroy me. You know what I would say to Sam Meggs? Your ideology justifies what you did to me. And the system that you're a part of amplified it at every step. You can justify that. You can justify doing what you did to me to every single woman on this planet. And you'll excuse it by saying, well, I do it to the men too. You would do that. Your ideology does that. Just for my beliefs. Not for my actions, just my beliefs. Well, guess what? I would never do that to you. Not in a million years. I would never advocate you being blacklisted from the comics industry. I would never write a slanderous article about you. I would never support anyone who did that. I would never support anyone who forced you out of a convention because they didn't like your politics. I would never do that to you. I would never support a belief system that would or could justify that based on your beliefs. Your behavior is different, but based on your beliefs. When I started this whole process, I never thought that I would make money. It's ridiculous. At the very best, I could maybe get some of the expenses that I lost in the process of being evicted back. But I never thought that it was, you're not going to get a windfall in civil court, period. And like I said, I was looking maybe to get some of the expenses back. Never expected to make money. And in fact, from the very beginning, I expected, or I at least feared, that they would try to take everything away from me. And I was right. That I would end up facing a huge bill for attempting to test protections for consumers in Canada, that I would face punitive financial losses for daring to step up and say, hey, I have rights. You did something wrong. You can't just breach your contract with me. You can't just lie about me. You know, there are laws against these activities. That's why I said as much. And also, to be honest, there was something weird about all of this. After the summary judgment, in which it was declared that our causes had merit, the first trial, there was something so strange about not just the defense, after I had done a day and a half of direct testimony, not just the defense pushing for settlement, but the court itself. It was surreal. Supreme Court Justice came down to try to force me to settle. The focus was on me. He was trying to get me to feel like I was wrong for being stubborn, that I had no chance, despite the fact the defense wanted to settle. It was just the emphasis on trying to push through a settlement by the court itself just struck me there was something off about it. And now I suspect that they didn't want to give this judgment. They didn't want to reveal the depth of the corruption. And during the settlement talks, I was essentially bribed. I was bribed by the Mary Sue. Karen would say that what they offered, what they dangled in front of me for dropping the case, would have been worth $1 million worth of publicity for HoneyBadgerRadio and me. Except the only problem is that I said I would go for a judgment, not a settlement. So I told them, I'm not settling unless you give me enough to pay back everybody who's invested in this lawsuit. At least the first investment. And instead of coming back with a counter offer, they came back with a threat of defamation. If I wanted money, I wouldn't have done this. If I wanted to benefit myself, that's when I would have taken the bribe. Sure, forget it. I'm not gonna, who gives a shit? I mean, they put all this money in for a judgment, but I can get $1 million worth of promotion. I can benefit myself. Nope. I walked away from that to take this to a judgment like I said I would. And I could feel bad about that, and I do. It's like if I had been more selfish, I probably would be further ahead of the game. So if I face this, at least I face it knowing that I've done the right thing. No good deed goes unpunished. And as for why I did it because the men's rights movement has a persistent problem of people breaking and breaching their contracts with us. The 2014 ICMI nearly didn't happen because a venue in Detroit pulled out. And in 2015 didn't happen because of the financial hardship that AVFM went through from the 2014 venue pulling out. In 2017, once again, a venue pulled out. It's a persistent problem that for some reason companies believe contract law does not apply to men's rights activists. So I had men's rights activists asking me to fight back. To make a public statement that, yeah, actually it does apply to us. It does apply to the bad people of the world, the people who disagree with feminists, who simultaneously, get kicked out of conventions, blacklisted from entire industries for advocating for their views, but are also advocating for the status quo. And I was also asked by proponents of Gamergate, because let's face it, having that Gamergate flag on my booth, thanking Gamergate for helping me get there in the first place, that was a big reason why all of this happened. And fighting back means that that's not acceptable. That Gamergaters have a right, proponents of Gamergaters have a right to participate in geek and gaming communities. People who disagree with feminists have a right to participate in geek and gaming communities. And if these companies want freedom of association, fine. Be clear about it. Say in your contracts who the unpersons are, so we can decide for ourselves whether or not we want to support you. Don't hide it if you're proud of it. I don't know how to make people care about this. I could ask you to help. I'm just fucking tired of asking. I really do not want them to be able to take away HoneyBadgerRadio. I said to them, you took away everything you could in 2015. You took away my reputation in the comics industry. You took away my right to participate. And at that time, the operations manager informed me that that most likely would apply to every comic book convention that Informa owns. Not just Calgary Expo, but Informa. So every comic book convention in the world. If I kept fighting, which I did. Oh, that's the other thing. It wasn't just a bribe, there was threats. Stop fighting, and you'll get to come back, and you won't also be evicted from every other convention that Informa runs, which is almost every convention in the world now. So they took that away, and I said, there's nothing more you could take. What a stupid thing to say. Of course there's something more they can take away. There always is. So, they took away my career in comics. They took away my ability to attend conventions. And they are gunning for HoneyBadgerRadio. There you go. And I'm just watching this. And there's a part of me that's sort of a little bit detached. And I'm watching this and I'm like, how far does this go? How much do you take away from a person? Even more astoundingly, how much do you take away from a woman for simply speaking out against feminism? For standing up for men's rights, speaking out against feminism, and promoting a consumer revolt for ethics and journalism. How much? How much is the system going to grind me down? And the funny thing is I have to keep asking, hey guys, can you help? And the same people have to keep giving over and over again. And it seems very unfair, but the world is unfair. And of course, at the end of the day, feminists will say that I'm taking the easy road, no matter what is taken from me, in order to advocate for these issues, in order to stand up for what I believe in. I'm taking the easy road. And also, I'm a bad person for saying that feminism is not that great. All right. Trying to think if there's anything else to say. These are all my unsold boxes of Xenospora Volume 1 and 2, and a single issue floppy comic that I created as well. All told, over $10,000 worth of investment into printing my comic book. And basically they will remain unsold since I have no physical place to actually sell my comic book. It's a little crushing, but this is one of the boxes. It's really quite heavy. There we go. This is Volume 1. Really close up here. I'm actually quite proud of the cover. I spent 7 years working on the story and the illustrations in Volume 1 because I kept revising them, so I wasn't happy with them. I ended up just deciding I needed to get something out there, which is something that I learned from working on HoneyBadgerRadio. Eventually you just have to cut it off and get something out so that people can look at it, and you have to start. Volume 2 was quite a bit faster. It only took me about 4 months, and that was because I had figured out more of my process and how I was going to approach creating the pages, and I had gotten a lot more confident in my art. I wanted to make sure that the characters looked like they were within a three-dimensional space, and I really wanted to avoid where the characters felt more like paper dolls laid over top of each other and then over top the background. The second volume I felt like I was starting to get there. The story of the story. In 2007, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer, and we had always had a very rocky relationship. During the time that she was being treated, she went through a lot of very painful and very frustrating treatments, and she took a lot of her resentment out on me during the process. Until about 2 weeks before the end, where she had decided that she wasn't going to undergo any more treatment, that she was just going to let go. And I remember coming down into the basement where we had set up the area that she was in, and I was bracing myself for another barrage of complaints. And instead, she looked up at me and she smiled. And the most genuine, open smile. And she opened her arms for a hug and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." And that was what it was like for those final weeks. And I had seen that not just with my mother, but also with other people who had gone through terminal illnesses. It's like the last few days, the last week, all of their petty grievances or their anger, everything just fell away, and all that mattered was the time that they got to spend with their friends and family. And they were so grateful for it. And it just, going through that, it got me thinking, why do we have to get to that point? The point where we're facing the end, before we realize what really matters. And after I went through that experience, and after my mother passed, I started to work on a story that explored that question. And that story was Xenospora. And essentially, the human race has, in the far future, has seeded the stars. And every single colonization wave has come out of its own particular technological context and its own cultural context, and has its own reason for having left, and its own philosophy that it's pursuing. And they're meeting up with each other again. And all along this frontier, war and genocide and hostile standoffs are taking place. And into this situation, it follows two characters that have every reason to hate one another. And you could probably add a few more reasons to every reason, and you get how many reasons they have to hate one another. One of the characters is Ann Koa, who is a former weapons scientist, and the other is Blunt Trauma, who's part of a rediscovered race, and a scion of a very powerful and dangerous family. Romeo and Juliet, if Romeo and Juliet had started off trying to genocide each other's families. Or another example would be a love story between Boadicea and Polonius, the general who pretty savagely put down her rebellion. Or Marie Antoinette and Robespierre. So it's just this idea of these two fairly powerful people who have been at odds, and they come together through accident, through fate. And eventually they have to face each other's decisions, their past decisions, and they have to ask themselves, how much do I forgive? And the whole story is really about the human race, all of these different strains of the human race, learning to love each other once again. I really loved being able to go to these conventions and sell. Sales are actually just another extension of storytelling. And it was pretty inspiring to be able to talk about this story and inspire someone else to get excited about it. So for me, every one of these books represents a conversation I could have had about a story that I love very much.